Hi, Johanna. How are you?
Hi, I'm well. How are you?
I'm
Can you
good.
hear me
Thank
all
you.
right?
Yes, I can hear you properly. Thank you so much for joining us. It's an honor for us to have you here as a keynote speaker, and we are looking forward to have a great session from you.
Thanks for inviting me. Thanks for having me. Great to be here. So you can see my screen, I hope.
Yes, it's perfectly working. Good luck. Stage is all yours.
Thank you. So, hello, everyone. Uh, as you heard, I'm going to talk about data privacy and discuss the paradox between big data, innovation, and processing of personal data. My aim is to have a global approach, as anything linked to digital or innovation tends to have an international spread. Country borders may apply to law, but more rarely to data. I will have the GDPR as a backbone throughout the presentation, as GDPR needs to be taken into account in anything we do today. GDPR being the abbreviation of the European Union's General Data Protection Regulation, which is the world's first really detailed and sophisticated privacy law. After GDPR entered into force in May 2018, it's been widely copied by the rest of the world. And this law also very much sets the foundation and general expectations on privacy and what can or can't and should or shouldn't be done with people's personal data. You already heard a little bit of who I am, but I'm going to briefly introduce myself a little bit more so that you know who I am and why I get to be here and talk to you today. If you have any questions, please type in the chat function and I'll try to pick these up at the end or during. And I'll also do my best not to get too carried away so that there will be a little time left at the end for potential questions, but also not to interfere with the coffee break that is coming up afterwards. My name is Johanna Molander. I'm a lawyer by education. I have a very Nordic background. I've been involved with privacy since around 2016 as a data protection officer, as an in-house lawyer, as a compliance officer, and now as a global compliance manager for data privacy. Previously, I have, among other things, worked almost 10 years within the electricity sector as a Swedish state official, working a lot with international affairs and transparency. And as part of that work, I spent a lot of time in Brussels with new electricity laws being developed. I've also worked with data governance at the Nordic Baltic Electricity Exchange. Since about 3 years, I work at Sandvik, and I've noticed that no company today say what they really do. We do not say that we are a 160 years old industrial company specialized within the fields of mining and construction, rock processing, and advanced metal cutting. Instead, we say that we are a global high-tech engineering group. Sandvik is divided into 3 business areas, and I'm heading privacy at the biggest of these business areas. On a personal note, I have a husband and we have 2 kids, 6 and 9 years old. And anyone who has kids know that they take all your time. But if there is some time that I don't devote to family and work, I like to do sports. Since a few years, I'm into triathlon, so swimming, biking, running. Let's start with the basics. We have a lot of data today. Everything we do generates data and information. We know so much and can analyze and develop almost anything. There are usually different figures mentioned. One is that it's calculated that the world in 2022 will produce and consume 94 zettabytes of data. To put it in perspective, 1 zettabyte is 1 billion terabytes. That's more than anyone can understand. What we can do today can be illustrated by this. We can do everything from general healthcare and complex life-saving predictions. We can figure out how a virus will spread, predict traffic congestion, or which fashion we'll be wearing the coming decade. Data is fantastic, and we really want the best of it. This development and innovation has been made possible because of a large variety of different data sources. Data comes from different sources in different shapes and represents all aspects of a person's life. We have boring data such as names, birthdays, places, shoe sizes, but also health data, statistical data, historical data, and behavioral data, such as what we eat, where we like to move, where we travel, and why we want to travel there, movie preferences, and so on. With the combination of the amount and variety of data and extensiveness and high quality of data, we have an unprecedented possibility to do great things. So it's around this stage that we need to start thinking about and apply privacy compliance. The issue today isn't as much what we can do, it's can we do this in a sustainable way? Can we continue in a way that is ethical and in the way that we can stand up for and defend? Otherwise, we're going to end up with this. This is a painting by Rembrandt and illustrates what level healthcare can drop to if we make the wrong mistakes and disregard compliance. The scary thing is that this actually already happens today. Compliance and doing in the right way needs to be integrated into the business and everyday ways of working. And in relation to IT security, there starts to be a higher maturity about how important compliance really is. When a hacker closes down the business, whether you're a big company like the Danish shipping operator Maersk or a small startup, you can be put out of business if you're arrogant about IT security. A Finnish psychotherapy care provider called Vastaamo was hacked 2 years ago. The personal data of patients leaked on the internet. All customer trust was lost, and last year they filed for bankruptcy. It takes many years of hard work to build up a good reputation and an expensive trademark, and it suffices with just one incident with personal data leaked and bad management to wipe away that investment. No company wants to be among the bad examples of what happens when laws and ethics are not part of the business context. Let's set the scene a little more. What is privacy? I love this topic. It's so broad and it changes constantly. With every step of development, the notion of privacy changes as well. It also affects all of us. It's our personal data, our behavior that is the topic. We are the topic. It hits really close. A lot of people still claim that they don't really understand and that privacy isn't that big of a deal for them. But that excuse doesn't really fly anymore. 10 years ago, sure, but not in 2022. So, privacy and innovation. A few facts, not news, but important foundations that we need to be on the same page about. Innovation and development today is made possible because we have all this data. We've developed a society where everything generates data. We can analyze, we can compare, we can build with. Big data, but also artificial intelligence, IoT, everything connected. The word digital is mentioned on every homepage and in every business in the world. The law firm Evershed Sutherland's recently published a report where they mentioned that company executives say that they plan to invest 10 trillion US dollars in digital transformation the coming 5-year period. Another fact that is important to keep in mind is that this digital is personal data generated by us. Maybe not us directly always. Pretty often it can be a machine that we've developed that generates the data. But without a human touch, there is not that ignition that makes that data is generated. And it's above all fantastic to see this and be part of this revolution. So much great and fun and useful and also life-saving follows from modern innovation. On the flip side, however, if we run too fast, also very bad things will come. Internet is a really good example. Internet was supposed to bring freedom to everyone, to be a platform of democracy globally, free information and education to all, regardless of who your parents are or how much wealth you have. And that's how it was to a large extent for many years. Then a few big companies noticed that they could start harvesting personal data through their platforms and develop and tailor their offering. Great news for us, the users. Personalized offers when online shopping. I see pictures of cute cats and plants and pretty shoes when I do a search, as opposed to my husband, who on the same computer is shown power tools and boxing and fast cars. Then competition escalated, which brought that the big dragon started to make it mandatory to share more and more information and personal data, to share personal data also with friends and family, to turn on microphones and cameras to listen to what we believed to be private conversations. And we all love a good algorithm, but you can probably, as well as me, imagine the all not so dandy things that can come with people's personal data. The Russian interference in the US election in 2016, where millions of Americans were fed with manipulated data in a really elaborate way, was one of the scarier things. If democracy and free thought is overthrown in one of the world's largest democracies, we can picture the end of good and rise of evil. So, personal data, who we share it with, and what is done with it has an impact that we can't disregard, even if we don't understand it until later. Internet doesn't share check facts. Internet shows you what you want to see or what your government wants you to see. Big data has brought with it that truth has become a commodity that can be purchased. When we reached a point in the world where it was clear that internet and digital and the use of our personal data started bringing more bad than good, and that there wasn't any big players that were going to take responsibility or apply ethics, that's when states decided that it's time to regulate large companies and organizations and also authorities' use of personal data. Like any laws, privacy laws were enacted as the last resort. These laws aren't always the most liked or understood ones, which is why it's extra important that we understand the reason to their existence and remember the history. The purpose with privacy laws, such as the GDPR, is to make sure that innovation can happen in the best way possible globally for everyone. I have a few more boring slides, but I want us to reminiscence what the GDPR and other privacy laws regulate. What does the law say? Meaning, how are we to process personal data in a compliant manner? That question can be answered by establishing the purpose of privacy and privacy laws. So, except for innovation and digitalization to carry on, the purpose of privacy law can be pinned down to being to protect an individual's fundamental rights and freedoms. Closely linked to that is to make sure that each person has the right to decide how his or her personal data is used. No one except me is supposed to decide what is done with my name and in my name. For that purpose to be fulfilled, companies need to be transparent and explain in a way so that each person can understand what the intention is with the collection of personal data, so that individuals, in particular vulnerable ones such as children, are protected from, for example, pictures being spread. Organizations are accountable for following data privacy principles. And privacy law is driven by principles so that it's supposed to be not too hard to apply, but also so that no organization can get away based on a technicality. We must think about following the spirit of the law, be just, be correct, respectful, transparent, have high ethical values. And we also see, for example, certain big companies and social media platforms trying to argue that they are open and proportional, but losing and being a little slaughtered by fines from data protection authorities, and also order to stop a certain activity. In order to be able to understand why big data and privacy, two important things that we're fans of, are contradictory, we must remind ourselves of what personal data is. As the notion of privacy is so broad, it's impossible to write down an exhaustive list of what data can constitute personal data. Personal data is any data that can potentially identify a living human being. It can be data such as email address, IP address, employee ID number, when you call in sick to work, as well as your voice, your posture, how you move. Here too, you can't play stupid and say you don't know who's actually in front of a computer, so an IP address can't be personal data, because really, you can find out. Like you can find out which employee under ID number corresponds to which employee. When we combine different sets of data that wasn't personal to begin with, such as the physical address of an apartment building, with a first name, we've all of a sudden produced personal data. If we have software with the functionality that users can add photo of themselves to make their profile look nicer, then there's processing of sensitive personal data, as a person's ethnicity can be identified from that photo. Combination of data, problematic when we're talking about big data. In one way or another, a lot of the data that is being processed is personal data. A common approach is to anonymize this data. In a standard case, it makes it possible for an organization to get the advantages of the data while being compliant. But when we have a lot of data, that isn't processed in the same manner as the limited, clearly identified data sets we decided with in the beginning. When we have big data, even if we anonymize it, the computer can connect the data, find individual patterns, and identify people instantly. And at that point, we're back to processing personal data with the whole range of privacy principles to apply. But above all, it's an obstacle when we're trying to invent something new that everything is already known. In essence, an organization can do everything right, apply privacy law and ethical thinking, and not get out of the peril that personal data processing can bring. Another aspect that's worth mentioning is that, say that an organization manages to successfully anonymize personal data, but uses one of the large cloud providers, and that cloud provider has a breach. All of a sudden, enormous amounts of data through which it's impossible to identify people is out there. And actually, just the thought that a large multinational cloud and IT service provider is out there processes so much data. They know more about us than we do ourselves, both professionally and privately. And we do fight with them about getting clauses into the license and service agreements about that they ought not to look at our data or to use it as part of their business development for unclear or sometimes questionable reasons. But they know that we're a little locked in. We've used them for so long and given them everything. So they control us more than we control them. I believe that big data is one of the keys for a better future, if handled correctly today. If we don't handle it correctly, it's still going to be a very integral part of our future, but not in a good way. Connected to this, there are a few nuggets that keep coming back to me. One is that internationally used large IT service providers for email, cloud solutions, CRM for data modeling, IT infrastructure, etc., all originate from the US. This is to where all the data flows. The physical servers can be and are in different geographies many times, so data is processed everywhere, and sometimes that's used as a pretend example for that data wouldn't be able to be accessed from the US because the server is in Finland or in Ireland. Nevertheless, is it really good that one country sits on all the data and consecutively all the personal data in the world? We can consider ourselves really lucky that that country is a democracy and that it usually stands up and fights for the free world. But then, nevertheless, we all have lost a bit of diversity and possibility to innovate without any glass ceiling when we're at the mercy of one country's laws, morality, and whatever leadership the people there elected to rule. Because even if we would want to break free, it takes many years to build up competitive services of this kind somewhere else. So in reality, we're locked in and have very little possibility to negotiate. In the short perspective, as I said in the beginning, many people are still of the opinion that it's not that big of a deal and that we get good products or services, really fun social media platforms, great photo filters, and getting the right targeted searches on the internet can make us save time. Sometimes it's really frustrating to surf the internet with all privacy settings turned on. To fight for rights and freedoms is energy consuming. But the companies that have this, all our data, might not care about the greater good or cancer treatments, ending poverty, or saving lives. They might only care about how to sell more to lower cost. And even if ESG, environmental, social, governmental, is really trending and has an improved impact on share value, many companies still have a hard time relating. This is another perspective that we should keep in mind when we are sharing our personal data, most of the time without any hesitation at all. The value it could have for us, for society, that might get lost. Maybe it's really good for all of us with fair competition and with companies originated from different parts of the world. This ties back to the big data we have, where there is a possibility to link most data set to actual people, can have a backlash in innovation, as well as just working with unknown theory. It's really hard when we're trying to innovate something new, when everything is known and bias is already a little applied. Another nugget, a fact really, comparable to big data, privacy, innovation, IoT, Internet of Things, the connected dishwasher, heating system, refrigerator, When these came, IT security was deliberately dropped in order to make the connected device more user-friendly, in reality to make it possible to get the smart function from the smart device at all. No one has time with a dishwasher that requires safe passwords and firewalls. It has to just work with minimal effort from the consumer. Great, because who would want to hack a fridge? Well, turns out a few years later, there were a lot of criminals that wanted to and did. DDoS, denial of service attacks, are a fact. And what better for a hacker than to type into all of our smart devices and have a few million washers and dryers attack an authority or a governmental body? Massive impact for countries and people, and almost impossible to stop while it's happening. The same as not foreseeing the DDoS attacks coming a few years ago, it might be hard for us to today understand the implications that disregarding privacy can have in relation to big data. There is no straight answer, but let's not make the same mistakes as before. Let's do best in applying security measures, even if we may not always understand if and how and why and when we get the payback. Because the same way we wouldn't have had to mess around with GDPR and privacy laws today if the big platforms would have been a little unselfish in the start and not taken all the personal data and been transparent and fair and ethical, we might not have the same issues coming up later on. I'm going to wrap up, being a little mindful of time, and end with a few key takeaways. To make life easier, apply compliance and security as part of the business and everyone's everyday work in order to save time and for business continuity. There's no need to overcomplicate, follow the principles. Privacy laws are not about paragraphs and legal interpretation as much as it's about using common sense in order for data to be processed with people staying safe. Take responsibility so that innovation will be free and to avoid overregulation. We set the scene. We are the people on this planet that have the means to do that. As employees, as companies, let's not be naive about who we share our data with or what countries we think that we can make money in. We will be held accountable for our actions by the next generation. Let's not make the same type of mistakes previous generations did with not being able to halt climate change. Think about what happens tomorrow following the decisions made today. You've probably heard before that the internet never forgets, but also we're getting more data by the minute, and soon we won't be able to impact at all what machines learn based on our personal data. A cyber attack is also a privacy breach. Avoid fines and reputational loss. People today understand that idiot hackers can close down businesses. As long as there was serious IT security in place and company brand might maybe be able to be forgiven. But if there's a lot of personal data lost, people suffer in a totally different way. It's personal and it can come back and haunt you for years. That's bad PR for any organization. Lose the trust and you lose sales. I wish I could say that all unethical companies will eventually be put out of business by the customers leaving and by law enforcement. We know that's not true. Otherwise, a few big companies that have the worst reputation on the planet would be gone long ago. However, we have to start applying all kinds of compliance. We're just coming out of a global pandemic, and now we have a war in Europe. Big data and innovation can be so good or so bad. From a general R&D and business perspective, ethical organizations tend to do better and attract smarter employees. There will always be unethical companies that abuse. Don't be one of those. That's all for me. Thank you.
Hi, Johanna. Thank you so much for your wonderful session, and it was really very informative, and I loved it. So, I think everyone have enjoyed your session, and I think we do have a question for you. So, we have a question from Sylvia that how to start implementing privacy in a company.
I would start with looking at the principles. What principles are there to follow? They're clearly listed in privacy laws and in the GDPR. You can also just do a search on the internet, data minimization, data accuracy, and all these, and then make sure that these are integrated and that these is something that is followed throughout the company. But above all, also accept that Look at what personal data is within the company. What data is there being processed? You have to know within each organization what personal data you have, why you have it, what you do with it, where did you get it from. Let the people whose personal data you're processing know that you have this data. And then also make sure that you delete the personal data where you don't need it. If you really don't need it, then you should anonymize it, or make sure that it's not personal data that's identifiable, or just do business without personal data. So there's a lot of principles that can drive the whole implementation.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Thank you so much, Johanna. And we have really enjoyed your session. I will ask the audience that if they're still having any question, they can ask in the chat or in the QA session. And Johanna, thank you so much for your wonderful session and for your time.
Thank you. Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
me. My
Thank
pleasure.